Welcome to Blockchain Unpacked. Blockchain Unpacked is a videocast and podcast series held in partnership between RegTech Associates and Crystal Blockchain. Join Jason Baud and Marina Kaustova every month and explore the real-world impact of criminal activity beyond the blockchain. During the series, we will introduce you to a range of experts who will help analyze regulatory effectiveness and share the latest news, trends and predictions in a digestible format to keep you in the know.
Hi, I'm Jason Baud, the CEO of RegTech Associates, and welcome to Blockchain Unpacked. This show features expert insights from prominent leaders in the blockchain, regulatory and technology industries. I'm delighted to be co-hosting this show with Marina Kaustova, CEO of Crystal Blockchain. And Marina and I will kick off by covering some developments in the Web3 space that caught our eye. We'll then be joined by this week's special guest, Harm Aarts, who's the co-founder and head of product at 21 Analytics. 21 Analytics are a provider of travel rule compliance software, and that's a very topical area at the moment, and we'll get into that later. So, as we kick off, without further ado, Marina, good to see you again. How are you, and what's been going on in your world since we last caught up?
Hi, Jason. Hello, and it's really good to be back to our recordings. So, yeah, this summer, especially for our business, for Crystal Blockchain, and in general for blockchain analytics and compliance industry, really stands in stark contrast to the previous years. So we see quite noticeable rush among many crypto-related companies to actually bolster their compliance teams and to wrap up, associated trainings and before the autumn season actually takes the full swing. And as a month before, I still can sense the underlying optimism on the markets, and it's heartening to see new businesses actually launching around the world, which was something that I couldn't notice, about a half a year ago in the middle of crypto winter. That's also always a very good sign for us, and we welcome to see these businesses. So yeah, a couple of developments, and particularly on the regulatory side, that caught my attention, which I think are worth discussing and mentioning. So every year, Financial Action Task Force (FATF) releases the updates to their anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing measures, and they're particularly targeting virtual assets and virtual asset service providers in these documentation. And their goal is very clear, of course, to staunch any potential criminal and terrorist misuse within the sector. But in this document that they have published recently, they are reporting that since the first publication of these requirements, they see a staggering 75% of the assessed jurisdictions that are either non-compliant or are partially meeting an FATF stipulated requirements, which is quite a big number, I must say. And of course, they're leaning towards pushing for stronger risk assessments. And they're clearly stating in these documents a very important point that actually banning cryptocurrencies is not an option. So they're emphasizing that the only way to come to a better market is actually to rigorously monitor the virtual asset service providers and all the associated entities. So it's quite an important regulatory pulse that is happening every year, and their assessments are quite important for all other jurisdictions. Everyone looks into them, and I think another critical development that we are expecting to happen, right, especially for those based in UK, is happening on the 1st of September. So the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) in the UK is mandating the travel rule. And it is a direct reaction to the FATF's call for various jurisdictions to swiftly implement the travel rule and actually to bring all the procedures for a better monitoring of the crypto transactions. So yeah, I think those are the most important things that are happening in the markets this summer from the regulatory standpoint. And in the light of our special guest today, I think it would be very good to discuss exactly what these changes are bringing to us and how we can see the same maybe approach developed in other territories, not only in UK.
Yeah, I think that's a great intro to the show, Marina. I think when you look at the role of FATF and the role of regulators and industry standards bodies, and later on we're going to talk about our next guest on our next show, but today I think that's a perfect segue. Your perspective is really interesting as well, because if you're seeing people in regulated institutions really cramming in on training, you're seeing building, and I'm seeing building and I'm seeing investment in the Web3 and crypto space, and we're seeing this maturity at the same time of the regulations. As we've discussed in previous shows, listen, it's the cost of doing business now. It's not going away. Regulation and compliance, cost of doing business, get certified, get the technology in place, and off we go, and let's grow this industry. So I think you are as well. I can tell now. I know you well enough to interact. You're super optimistic, and I am as well. So that's a great start.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, we are experiencing optimism across, our team, gearing up for what autumn brings us, and we see the flurry of activity on both layer 1 and layer 2 chains, and it's very evident. And we understand that travel rule is, of course, something that a lot of the companies are fixing right now, are implementing very swiftly. But there's another challenge, next to that is like how to understand the cross-chain activity, how to assess your customer or entity's activity holistically. So we are a SaaS company, right? We're developing software. So summer for us was also devoted to building better and improving, the engines that are providing all these capacities, and actually following and listening to what market needs. And it's obvious that market right now requires better instruments on the visualization. So we added 8 new blockchains to our visualization engine, and this expands quite a lot the monitoring and investigative capacities for compliance teams. So that's our development for the last month. Again, we're trying to bring as much as possible, empower all these customers who are launching their activities this autumn, or preparing for the change in the compliance policies and procedures. Yeah, but what about you, Jason? What's going on in your world and RegTech Associates?
Thanks, Marina. I mean, summer's always an incredibly busy period for us. We've got lots of client work going on. We do a lot of work around helping growth companies with sales and marketing. So always a really busy time. We've also hired 3 summer interns, and they've been helping us with our product. So Radar is our product at RegTech Associates. It's a marketplace of insights and RegTech and RiskTech products, and also news about the markets. And in the last month, we've been literally scouring the world, looking for new products, looking for updates. We've been updating the financial crime section of our marketplace. Just to give you an order of quantity, we track about 600 financial crime products from around the world. It's sometimes blows me away that there could be 600, reg and RiskTech products focused on solving financial crime, but there is. And actually, as we go through, we track and tag different solutions as to the problems they're solving. And to give you an example, there's 12 travel rule solutions amongst those 600 financial crime solutions that we're tracking. So, really nice to see new products coming into the market. And obviously, we're going to be talking to one of the founders of one of those software companies very shortly.
That calls for a real map of activities and products, and I'm excited to see that a lot of development. And we are not yet completed with the within this cycle of the regulatory changes, and that definitely calls for even more products to join this array of solutions.
Yeah, exactly, and maybe we need some of the crystal blockchain magic on how we start to visualize some of our data, right? Because we have a tremendous problem. We produce these graphical market maps, and it's quite hard fitting 600 logos on like a equivalent of a piece of digital A4. So we're definitely going to need to get into graph, and we're going to do that with one of our upcoming maps around AI. So look out for that.
Oh yeah, congrats on that. That's a great development, and I can see that again. Risks associated with digital assets in general, they are not only limited by compliance and regulation, and it's important for any company that steps into this area to understand what capacities do they have actually. So thank you for that. I think the market will appreciate this a lot.
Fantastic. couple of bits of news I came across recently I wanted to touch on. One was I came across something called OSWAR, OSWAR, and it's a open standards Web3 attack reference. So built by the community with contributors from tech companies like Cybers, but also some big companies like Google, Capgemini, Block Apex, and many other firms. And it's basically, I think it's really relevant to our last call we had when we were talking about sort of investigations and attacks as well, is the OSWAR framework is helping firms understanding attack behaviors and techniques and vulnerabilities. And it's a quite big and fast moving initiative. I think it's very bold, but really starts to lay out the language and the taxonomy for cleaning up and understanding typologies of attack, attack vectors. We'll put it in the show notes, but well worth taking a look at, people, oswar.org. And the second piece of news I wanted to touch on, and I know, Marina, you got some thoughts in this area as well, was around PayPal. And actually, two bits of news came to mind from PayPal over the last month or so. Announced last week, in the UK, they're actually stopping UK customers buying cryptocurrencies through and via its platform. And that's partly to do with the fact that the financial promotions regimes coming in Q3 and Q4 this year in the UK. So PayPal have sort of said, you know what, we're going to be compliant with this regulation and we're going to ensure that our customers are safe. But in the meantime, you can't buy any cryptocurrencies. You can hold or you can sell, but you can't buy. And that's the first interesting piece of PayPal related news. The second piece was about their stable coins. So they're the latest company and organization to launch their own stable coin. It's a US dollar stable coin, so pegged 1-to-1 as a stable coin would be with the US dollar, known as PayPal USD or PYUSD. It's part of their larger strategy around cryptocurrency that's been evolving for some time. But what was a surprise to me, I thought it was a really interesting move for a large, one of the big payment giants, if you like, in the market to be looking at instant, lower cost global payments and remittances. And I was, curious seeing that news at really the size of the stablecoin market. So, people have heard about Tether and USDC, but for curiosity's sakes, I just took a look at the global market cap of all the stable coins that are in the market, and it's a fairly large number at $124 billion, the market cap of stable coins. So yeah, a couple of bits. I'm not sponsored by PayPal, but quite those two bits of news were really interesting to me.
Oh, yeah, and it's interesting that you're mentioning this because I was also this week looking at the report published by Bruin Howard Digital Asset Company, and they describe stablecoins. They refer to them as a silent monster, and that's for the good reason. So basically, stablecoins silently and very clearly have become a very big, very important force in the crypto space. So. The report is it's very comprehensive, and really the numbers that you just mentioned, the overall turnaround, and the big players mentioned there, it's overwhelming to see this. Two primary takeaways from the report are that the global popularity of stablecoins is much bigger than we expect. And second important point is that there is a shift happening in their utilization patterns. So basically, users are leveraging these the stablecoins, crypto, right? But not for speculative purposes. So it's quite an important change, and of course, happy to see that. And for PayPal, particularly this move, it's a very interesting move from a business, from a high-level perspective, because previously, of course, they have been operating as a closed payment network, right? You could interact with other PayPal user, but largely that was it. But by launching their own stablecoin, the PYUSD, they're basically pivoting from this model. Now, any user, regardless of whether they use PayPal or not, they just need to have a wallet that supports ERC20 standard, and they can receive and interact on this stablecoin. So they're basically expanding from a closed ecosystem to an open one. And of course, it broadens the addressable market immensely. And you can now cater to much larger audience on the Ethereum network, which I think is an important and huge move. So I'm happy to see that PayPal becomes a big player in this Web3 ecosystem. So yeah.
And it'd be really interesting to see, what's coming down the line, right? The payment giants, which ones are going to follow suit, if they're not already. I must admit, by my own admission, I'm not a massive watcher of payments and payment rails, but, I think, like you say, this is an interesting strategic move by PayPal, and I'm sure they won't be the last to join this space, but yeah, interesting news. So listen, I think now's the perfect time to bring in this week's guest. Harm has more than 15 years experience as a software engineer and has founded several startups. His latest venture is 21 Analytics, where he focuses on travel rule compliance for virtual assets. He bought Bitcoin when it was 3 cents. I want to talk to him about that. And his master's in AI and subsequent pre-masters in economics further underlines his keen interest in this sector. Harm, please come on to stage. It's great to have you with us.
Hi, guys.
So first and foremost, welcome to the show. How are you doing, and what's been going on in your world, and what do you think about our chat so far? Anything you'd like to throw into the mix?
Yeah, I also was very keen following PayPal there, issuing their own stablecoin. I talk to a lot of people. Oftentimes, stablecoins are overlooked, but the revenue model for a stablecoin is so enticing, right? So you issue a coin, and the holder of that coin gets $1 back when it redeems it. But in the meanwhile, you actually have $1. So you can turn around and put it in some T-bills, for example, or some other assets like Tether is keen to do, and that will just generate a return. I believe it was Tether who posted an earnings of I think just shy of 100 million a month of only doing this. So I get it that PayPal is wanting in on this bit. And the other payment providers like Visa and MasterCard, I doubt they're very far behind, especially MasterCard. They've been buying up CipherTrace, for example. Yeah, it seems like they at least have a very keen interest of doing this, and then they move into that. It seemed like an acqui-hire in a sense, like they want to learn, and this is how they learn.
Yeah.
But also Visa has not been entirely quiet on this front. So we definitely see more of this.
So yeah, I think you're right, Harm. I think there's going to be more and more of those payments companies, in this space, and we'll keep a keen eye out for news and feature that in future shows. So listen, before we get into the travel rule, I thought it would be really useful to give some background context. So actually, I didn't know this. So hands up, one of our research analysts, Nathan, told me this, and I was like, "You sure?" I checked it out. You guys probably both knew this, but the travel rule was first introduced by FinCEN in the US Bank Secrecy Act, the BSA. It came into effect in May 1996, and the FinCEN travel rule requires financial institutions, obviously TradFi institutions, to pass on certain information to the next financial institution during the transmittal of funds, and that obviously often refers to wire transfers. And in 2012, the FATF updated their recommendations to include similar travel rule guidance for wire transfers as part of their recommendation 16. And then FATF adopted some changes in 2018 to expressly clarify that their recommendations also apply to financial activities involving virtual assets. And I think that's probably the starting point for our conversations, right? This isn't new, but also, they've been pushing for what now, 5 years at least into the virtual asset space. So, Marina, over to you.
Yeah, well, travel rule definitely has been a known measure in the conventional financial sector for nearly a quarter century. So now its significance becoming prominent in the Web3 domain. So, Harm, maybe you can describe how and why it has become pivoting and combating financial market malpractices and market violations in the crypto space. And additionally, maybe you can cover on what might be the reasons for the regulators taking this long to actually champion this application.
Yeah. Well, first off, Jason, you're in good company not knowing this, because I speak to a lot of people and nobody really knows about this. And it was in 2018 when I was reading this. I think it was somewhere on Twitter that was the same thing like this. The reason why it took so long, in a sense, right? It's been now 5 years in the making. I think that has several reasons. First off, the travel rule for fiat is relatively simple. That message which you need to collect, the data you need to collect and send over, you can pair that with your fiat transfer to begin with. It's just a message field, and you chuck it in there and be done with it. Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies are, of course, totally different. So there is a technological gap there. So it's easy via the Swift network, and it's pretty hard to do over Bitcoin. In fact, you can't do it really. And even if you could do it, there is a lot of pushback for it to do so. So you need to invent new systems. You need to invent other ways of doing that. And you see that the FATF requirement explicitly states you need to do this simultaneously. You send the coins, you send the message. But that of course, now you have two channels to do this in, and that is tricky. So that took some time for the market to actually figure this out, because there was no guidance from the FATF to do this. And then I think you mentioned in the beginning of the call there are 12 travel rule solution providers, and I think there are like roughly 8 different ways of actually transferring this data, not even counting email, carrier pigeons, and smoke signals. It's just hard for technology companies to do so. That's hard, but also for the regulator. What is this crypto anyway? This is this niche product. As you mentioned in the intro, I bought Bitcoin at 3 cents. I sold them at 30 cents. I was very, very happy about that. I made 10x. But for these regulators, this is a new kid on the block. There's a new risks. Marina can attest to that, no doubt. There's a new risk. There are new avenues, and we at 21 Analytics, we oftentimes talk about this. Just explain what this thing is doing. Why is it impossible to not have this message there? There is this in the fiat world. There is Swift, full stop. Well, now Russia is doing their own thing, and I think China, but by and large is one thing. And in one particular protocol on which we contribute, we recently integrated a list of assets, and I think it was 1,600 different assets. Yeah, you tell me. It's just a totally different scope, totally different thing, and I think that's the reason why it takes so long to get going, to be applied.
That's really interesting, Harm. I mean, so clearly there's been an educational cycle going on in the
Absolutely.
market, right? It sounds like you spend a lot of time educating the market, and it sounds like obviously the regulators are going to be part of that educating cycle. You think education has been one of the main reasons it's taken regulators some time to get behind the implementation? I guess just to frame that question, the FATF assessment they did back in June of this year, I think it was a survey of 151 countries, was pretty damning, right?
Yeah, it wasn't good.
Options. So,
no,
is it just lack of understanding, or is there more to it than that? What do you think?
I think there are 2 reasons. There's a lack of understanding. We as 21, we oftentimes go to, for example, the VCG meeting. That's a meeting with a lot of regulators, and then we always talk about what the difficulties are. Forget our product. Our team is first and foremost a bunch of engineers. We know the ins and outs. So then we talk to regulators, and they listen carefully, for example, they always talk about interoperability between protocols. I think that's a red herring. I think that's never going to work. On the other hand, sometimes it feels that travel rule regulation is co-opted for other means as well. And this might be a little bit controversial, but the FATF is very clear on what you need to exchange when you need to exchange it. And you see but it is a recommendation. But you see all the implementations of the travel rule are slightly different. So, for example, in the TFR recommendation, there is a threshold of €0. So you always need to transfer this stuff. Well, the FATF has a threshold of 1,000. The FATF mentions that you need to send along the originator name. While in TFR, you also need to send along the address, and barring that, the personal identification number. And you see all these little differences. Singapore is also quite strict on that. You have all these. Why would an implementation be stricter than the recommendation? It makes it much harder, of course, right? Because now I'm sending, for example, Canada has a weird field in there which you need to. So now, as a VASP, as an exchange, I need to figure out, oh, this is a Canadian VASP. They need other stuff, so you need to send that over. This wrangling, this implementation of the recommendation. Yeah, it's just not the recommendation. It's just their flavor thereof, and that makes it hugely complicated for VASP to comply.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on I think probably one of my primary questions I had for you, right? In I guess your day to day, you're talking to a lot of VASPs, you're talking to regulators, you're in this market, and is that complexity, and the lack of education, the two main reasons why the VASPs and around the world are slow in moving, and I guess the regulators around the world are slow in moving? Is that the main challenge?
That is a big challenge. I think that is the biggest challenge, but that is not the challenge why VASPs are slow to implement. VASPs are slow to implement because of the fact that you mentioned in your intro, there are 12 different products out there. They are waiting. It is also implementing compliance to the travel rule is complicated. You need to ask your user, your retail investor, different information. Then you have this information. Now you need to know what you want to do with that information. How you're going to store it. How are you going to send it? To whom are you going to send it? How are you going to receive all this information? So if you look, for example, at Crystal, I think is an excellent example. That is, you just have an on-chain transfer. You have an address, and you run it through Crystal C, and then you get a risk rating. Done. But with travel rule, it touches everything. It touches everything from your user interface to your compliance department to your counterparties, your inbound requests. It is VASPs massively underestimate how hard this is. And so oftentimes the calls I have, we never really talk about our product to begin with. I first want to impress upon them the fact that they have a problem. They know this travel, oh yeah, this is coming somewhere, but they need to get going. It's very simple to get going. I always have 2 tips to get them started, and then they are ahead of the curve already. But with the FCA enforcing the 1st of September, I think a lot of us are going to be in for an unpleasant surprise.
Quite a lot of challenges, and I assume also if the customer is growing and scaling up, there are many more questions associated with that, and how you store this data, on like how you set up different flows again for various jurisdictions and so on. And I assume that technology is exactly what should solve this, along with, of course, trained people and so on. But speaking about the technology, how you see developing and helping to comply with these rules as they are changing, because of course we are expecting more countries, to follow the path of UK, or maybe, devising a slightly different route. But anyway, how the technology makes it easier for the companies who want to embark on this journey.
Yeah. So a technology. So you can have a choice. Either you hire lots and lots of compliance people, or you go for a technology stack. Hiring lots of compliance people, well, I'm in this business, it's getting harder and harder to do so, but you would be compliant. For example, I flippantly mentioned smoke signals in the beginning. You could hire a compliance person who looks at the sky and see the smoke signals and then type it in some Excel sheet. The actual thing is, for example, sending email. FATF mentions that you need to send this instantly. Email is instant. But then you have all these emails and stuff, and you have a huge burden. If you do what a reasonable amount of transactions a day, that's a lot of email you need to process. And the end goal of the FATF travel rule is, of course, that it's not that you need to gather this data. It's for the FIUs. They need to follow this breadcrumb. They go to one exchange, request that data, and then move on to the next exchange, and then follow this trail. Imagine that an FAU comes knocking at your door and you have 15 million emails to go through. It's possible, it's going to take you a long time. If you look at the technology side, there are solutions out there, as Jason mentioned, which makes it much easier. So my personal favorite is TRP. That's a protocol, pure protocol. Everybody can implement it. In fact, we're giving workshops doing that. It's also on the technology side. You do these. If your counterparty also has TRP, it is very instant. It's immediately. You can immediately run it through Crystal, for example, and then get going there. Yeah, so technology is a great enabler. If you have this stack in order, then you don't have the cost on the other side. Oftentimes people complain about our pricing, of course, but hire 20 compliance people.
Mm-hmm.
It is such a no-brainer, but you need to get going now.
Mm-hmm.
So technology is a I think it was Marina who mentioned the cost of doing business. That is just what it is, and the cost needn't be so high. You just need to be aware of this and get going.
I think it's really interesting as well hearing you talk, Harm, because my vision of the people that run a VASP is highly technical, understand the protocols, understand the underlying currencies and the instruments they trade. And on the past couple of shows, we've had sort of compliance people on talking about, they're having to bring some of these people into the understanding of what compliance and risk management means. And I guess that's just like selling into this market. It must be pretty tough, right? Because you've got to educate the compliance people on technology and the technology people on compliance.
Yeah, so. and actually, most of the technologists running these VASPs, they are somewhat adverse to compliance. I mean, I speak to a lot of idealists. They're doing this because they believe in Bitcoin, they believe in decentralized money, and now we're here. You need to comply. There is really no way out, and they just don't want to hear it.
Yeah, and the travel rule space itself developed so much, and our space started speaking about travel rule about 5 years ago. And I remember in the early days, it was very highly compartmentalized in terms of these associations that grew around certain territories. And I think we are, of course, like 5 years later, we're a completely different state. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah.
How it becomes more evenly spread and more evenly distributed across territories.
When we started, I think 4 years ago, there were intentions. Intentions of we're going to do it this or that way. Us being a bunch of engineers, we got involved with as many protocols as possible because what we saw, the intentions weren't particularly great. So we got involved, and we still are involved in as much in as many protocols as we possibly can. What we see now in the market, I think we're seeing some sort of consolidation. So when we started out 4 years ago, there was a Cambrian explosion of protocols, solutions, and whatnot, and we see that die down a little bit now. So where there used to be 9 different protocols / products, and nowadays that's down to 3, maybe 4. And I'm specifically mentioning protocols, so how you talk to each other. You can build products on top of these protocols. That's actually what we do as 21 Analytics. We have a product and we speak a bunch of protocols. And we see the consolidation happen around geographical areas. So we see Southeast Asia, we see Europe, we see America. And it's actually funny that all these consolidations, they ingrain more or less the values of the jurisdiction or on the geographical plane there. So in Southeast Asia, privacy is not such a big deal. In Europe, that's very much a big deal, and in America, it's somewhere in between. As long America's, they like to make big statements, and they're doing so. But I think we're more or less seeing that happening now, and that makes it better for VASPs. Like if you're a Korean VASP and you're not doing business with any VASP in Europe, that makes it easier for you, and so forth. So I think we're moving in the right direction in a certain sense.
Yeah, the maturity of the market, clearly. That's good to see that.
Yeah. Some of the protocols we work on, for example, they just got small version bumps. In the beginning, you saw like huge changes, and now it's just a touch up left and right. It is to a high degree on all sides more or less stabilized, the protocols. But now now people start to use it. Well, the rubber hits the road. So now I imagine that's going to be interesting.
And Harm, what do you think about the incentives for I guess VASPs to implement travel? Okay, they have to from a regulatory perspective, and that's an ongoing. There's lots of things regulated firms need to do. They don't necessarily all do them in the same way or at the same time. So that's going to be a evolving picture. But what are the positives? Are there positives? You see, like the VASPs going, right, we're going to fully embrace this travel rule, and we're sending data across these jurisdictions to counterparties, and that's a business advantage for them. Is that too much of a stretch?
Yeah, I think for businesses, this is I think there are 3 distinct advantages of doing this. All of them are long term. So first off, you're building a moat. Not everybody has their process in order. The regulator will enforce at some point, and then you're good to go. Second, with travel rule, you are required to at least ask the name of the beneficiary from your user, and that's actually incredibly reminiscent if you do a bank payment. I also, Jason, if I send you money, I type in your name and your account number. So that brings it a little bit closer together, and that makes the culture shock maybe a little less harsh. And third, and this is basically the reason why we got involved in travel rule to begin with. You do not, with implementing this, we're not alienating the regulator, because this is a scary thing, or potentially a scary thing, and the regulator needs to understand this, needs to feel that they have a grasp on this in order to allow it. Marina, I was very happy to see that banning stablecoins is not an issue, and I think banning crypto at this point is going to be incredibly hard, but it would be, for the adoption of cryptocurrencies, it would be at least a significant road bump if jurisdictions would ban it. So it is an investment in the long term.
Great.
And you mentioned that there are different rule sets currently presented for different jurisdictions, but how different could they be? We see that, for example, in Crystal, that sometimes different jurisdictions have completely polar opinion about certain activities, right? Namely, gambling, for example, right?
Right.
Like, how do you see that? And also in the light of recent announcements from Jersey, particularly, how do you cope with that from the technological standpoint?
I'll be very frank with you, Marina. I don't think VASPs are going to cope with this in the short term. I think they're going to collect the beneficiary name and send that over and call it a day. And I think that's okay. That is what the FATF mandated. That might not be the letter of the law, but I think the regulator is going to catch up on this. They're going to cast their gaze outwards, and I think the regulators I speak to are very reasonable people. They have ultimately, I hope they have ultimately the goal to make this thing work. And in order to have this thing work, it is much easier if you just take the beneficiary name, and all the rest is, yeah, it's not great if you don't do it, but I think it's okay. And I think if we do this globally, I think it's so much easier for your tech team to determine to how to send all this stuff. Otherwise, imagine I'm at my Kraken account, and I'm going to send Marina some crypto, and all of a sudden I need your where you live. But if I send it to Jason, he lives in another jurisdiction, I need to send something else, so that form needs to change. Obviously, everything is possible in technology. I'm an engineer myself. I had lots of weird requests from employers. But do you really want this? Does this really serve the goal? And I think, and that's also why we go to these talk to these regulators. They always come back with this on interoperability I mentioned, and this is always my rebuttal. Please make sure that you align these things. It makes it so much easier. The FCA, to a degree, annoyed me a little bit. They have now crypto businesses. CB. It's just a VASP, but the TFR calls it a COSP. The French call it a BOSP, I think. Just align that already. That would be so great.
Yeah.
It's really interesting as well, because I mean, if you look back at regulations, almost pre-digital money, in this space, you've always had regulatory differentiation around the world, right? You've always had what's known as regulatory arbitrage.
Yeah.
People will go and set up in one jurisdiction because the regulation favored them. That's always existed, right? But I guess in many cases, that's been okay because perhaps you're dealing with a financial product or a payments network that's more regional. Right here, you've got a truly global network of sending and receiving money. And on top of that, you're trying to deal with the complexities of all this arbitrage. So actually, what you outlined, Harm, makes complete sense. I hate the analogy, but let's get to first base, send a beneficiary name, and then, because otherwise that's it, users are going to get really confused if you have to know who that, where that person's based and where that exchange is and where they're domiciled to know what information to send. That would be crazy, right?
A VASP still needs to know that, but regulatory arbitrage with travel rule is a thing of the past. Travel rule is contagious. So even if you're on the Seychelles or the Bahamas or Southern Sudan, if you want to send coins to a European VASP, done. You need to do it. So you can't put yourself in a jurisdiction which doesn't enforce it. You still need to do it. And Marina, you mentioned that a lot of jurisdictions are not compliant yet. That is a high number. I am surprised it's still that high, but it's also irrelevant for a lot of VASPs, because they need to look at the list of transactions they're doing. Where is this stuff going? That's actually also always where I recommend looking at an on-chain analytics firm. You need to know this stuff. It's a heuristic. It's not for sure, but then at least you can get going. You need to know your business to a higher degree than you used to do, and I think that's ultimately also what the goal is of the regulator. You need to know your customer. You need to know where this money is going to.
And beyond the further expansion and further adoptions, due to the contagious nature of this procedure and this policy, what's next for the travel rule? What do you see? Where do you see this evolving? And there are trusted networks, there are, of course, protocols, and there is a growing need for the companies to stay operating globally and be able to do that. So where it all leads us.
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think the industry is going to need to make a choice. Are we going to be decentralized, or are we going to centralize? And then you centralize around an equivalent of Swift, for example. Trust, for example, is an example of that. There is a centralized component, the PII data you exchange peer to peer, but there's always a centralized server in between. You can't take that out. That raises questions. Do we want that? Or do you want to put your business, because that's what it is? Do you want to put your trust in an organization like that? I think I'm not against it. It has certain advantages, but it's not necessary to do it like so. TRP, for example, and again, caveat: this is my personal favorite. That is purely peer-to-peer. You do not need to pay anybody. It is an open source protocol. You can implement it. Well, next week we have I already mentioned this workshop. Next week we have a workshop. It's free. You implement a client for TRP in 2 hours. It is simple. But what you see is that oftentimes you now need to know where you send the coins to, right? So what Trust is offering, Trust is saying, hey, we have a directory, and everybody part of this directory, we can tell you, give us an address, and we'll tell you where to send the stuff to. I think as Crystal, that must be brilliant. But that's not something, especially European VASPs like to relinquish. You're leaking company-sensitive information there, not only to all of your competitors, but also to the guys running this thing. I very much hope that TRP would be it, and TRP solves this in a slightly different way. TRP implements something called a travel address, and think of it as an IBAN, as you have in Europe. In an IBAN, you in the account number, you immediately see which bank it is. That's basically what travel address does. So there's no need for a centralized entity there, and that's the choice we're going to need to make with everybody. Are we going to centralize, or are we going to stay centralized? And another thing is DeFi. This always comes up, so I'm addressing it here. In this case, I think the regulator is quick to wisen up. I even recently heard this acronym DINO, decentralized and name only, which I think is perfectly apt. I mean, there are many DeFis, but they still have this company pushing that, or an association or something. I think there are actual DeFi products, and this is going to be hard. But let's not forget that the FIUs they're not idiots. I mean, you have just detectives there. They go to Marina and say, help us out here. This is just travel rule is not a holy grail. It's a tool, and you can still fight financial crime with the other tools you have. So I don't think it's such a big deal that DeFi is not under the travel rule. It's also I frankly, I don't really see how you would do this. How are you going to force these things to do that? This particular smart contract does it, and nobody's using it. How on earth are you going to do this? But I don't know. There is still a lot of talk about that, but it's all talk. Currently, no solution in sight. And there are DeFi protocols which are willing to go the extra mile. It's also, again, as I mentioned, these three advantages. These are DeFi protocols who subscribe to these advantages. They don't want to alienate their regulator. They don't want to alienate their users. They want to give, or institutionals, for example. We see a lot of institutionals coming on board now. They don't have any interest in going with some weird DeFi thing which doesn't comply with the rules. So I think you'll see a nice split there. So DeFi, I'm not worried.
I'm really interested to see how the whole trusted network versus open protocol,
Me too.
ends, right? Because I think actually if you look at it through different perspectives, you probably come to a different answer, right? So bear with me a sec. So you look at it through the technology perspective. I'm a technologist, so why wouldn't you have an open protocol, right? That's my vote, right? You look at it commercially, yeah, maybe there's a slightly different answer, right? Maybe the what happens often in regulated networks is you're with the crowd, right? If the big VASPs are in the crowd over there, I'm probably going to go over there as well.
Yeah, so, and it's also a matter of money, and we already touched on the education bit. So an open source protocol has no way of making money. That means that has no way of marketing themselves.
Exactly.
Has no way of educating the regulator. Has no way. I really wish.
And my third criteria. I'm just gonna mention the word and not say anything else. But politics. So three ways I'm thinking about how I might look at this debate moving forward. But yeah, really super interesting.
Yeah. The politics thing. Obviously, we're selling a product. We lose prospects, and how oftentimes it comes down to politics. It's disheartening at sometimes. Like, they know it's the wrong choice, still go with it. I get it. It's part of life.
So I think we're nearing the end of the show. Marina, any final wrap-up thoughts or comments from you?
Well, I'm thinking that, again, compared to what we have seen like 2 or 3 years ago, there is clearly a must-have array of solutions that any virtual asset service provider has to use at this moment. And the role of the compliance officer is also evolving and changing. You need to keep up with all these streams and understand how to combine them into the holistic strategy for the company that you're observing. So yeah, I understand that requires a lot of educational efforts, and particularly just wanted to highlight that your efforts, the efforts of 21 Analytics, on like educating both regulators and also participating in these initiatives, running workshops for the compliance teams, it's incredibly needed at this moment. I think because sometimes people overestimate, how complicated that would be, the deployment, but also they underestimate, the array of things that they need to pay attention
Exactly
to.
right.
So yeah, I think it's important that everyone who brings the technology also brings a body of knowledge and wisdom, on how to do and how to implement it and how to make better decisions for the business. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Happy to be here.
And Harm, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mentioned these two tips in the beginning, and I'd like to come back to that because getting started with the threat rule, especially if you heard me rant for the last 30 minutes, it seems daunting, but it is very easy to get going. 2 tips: get your crystal tool out there, run everything you have through that, and figure out who your counterparty is. Then you at least have an inkling where you're going, where your focus should lie. Must it be North America? Are you doing everything with Kraken? That makes your decision process much easier. Also, get an email address which reads travelrule@yourvasp.com. It is inevitable that you're going to receive travel information from counterparties who do not have a technical solution in place. Maybe even you don't have a technical solution in place. But if you have this address, you at least comply with the and it's very simple. Just write an email to your tech department, travel address at yourvasp.com. That's a very simple first step. It's going to pay so many dividends. If only that you can talk to your regulator and say, hey, look at us. We are receiving travel rule data here, and we are sending it to others as well.
Top recommendations. Thank you, Harm. A huge thanks to you as our special guest on this month's show. And we hope that everyone enjoyed the show, and tune in next month for episode 6.